Hi, I'm Peter Hilliard. I'm a music director and I'm the artistic director of the theater department here at Villanova University. And I'd like to give you a version of a lecture that I teach often at the graduate theater department here at Villanova about Sondheim and specifically On the Steps of the Palace and how On the Steps of the Palace works. Stephen Sondheim wrote Into the Woods with James Lapine, and many people know his work. Into the Woods is probably his most audience accessible piece. So even if you're not a Sondheim fan, you may have encountered this piece somewhere during your life. And if you're not a Sondheim fan, it may feel like the strangest musical that you've ever heard. It may act very differently than other musicals do. And what I'd like to do for both people who are new to Sondheim and people who understand Sondheim a lot is try to put Sondheim in a time, in a place, in a context that helps us understand why he made these choices that he made and how he came to write such individual, distinct music, unlike any other musical theater composer. It has to do with these two important mentors that Sondheim had. One is Oscar Hammerstein, and the other is Milton Babbitt. When Sondheim was a child, was a kid, Hammerstein was a surrogate father to him in many ways, and really a mentor who taught Sondheim how to structure a musical. Let's hear Sondheim talk about that influence himself.
So what I learned from him was, how to tell a story in song, which is not what Cole Porter was doing or Rodgers and Hart. There are other ways to write songs and other uses of them. Now, because of the success of Oklahoma and subsequent shows, most musical theater now tell stories through songs, but that was not true prior to 1943, and which is the year of Oklahoma. So he was teaching me, but he also taught me how to structure a song. He taught me the use of a rhyme, and everything, and about character, inconsistencies, what is effective on a stage, concision, all kinds of things. He was technically, very, very good. His writing today particularly seems somewhat naive, but not if you look at it technically, and certainly not from the use of the imagination. His imagination, his creative imagination was far more sophisticated than the work itself, and has affected the theater permanently.
Really, he is not just a father figure, but an artistic father figure for Sondheim. And Hammerstein, although Sondheim calls him somewhat naive here in his expression, is really the template for audience engagement that Sondheim is hoping for. Sondheim's other mentor was this very avant-garde composer named Milton Babbitt. Let's hear him talk about Babbitt.
And so, having won the Hutchinson Prize, I went to Milton and found that though in those days he wasn't yet on to electronic music, he was just writing atonal, he believed that, he did not believe in teaching atonal music. He believed that the only way you arrive at atonal music is by finding that the resources of tonal music just don't satisfy your requirements. That's how he arrived at it. So he only taught tonal music. And at that time he had a couple of classes at Princeton and about 5 private students. And he had room for me, so I studied with him for 3 years. And it was all tonal composition and theory. And it was analysis not of Varese, but of Beethoven and Mozart. And we would spend the first hour just sometimes actually analyzing songs. I remember a marvelous day, one of the lessons where we spent half an hour analyzing All the Things You Are, which is a remarkable song to analyze because it illustrates a lot of neat points about the sustaining of music over a period of time. And so, contrary to the formidable face he presents to the world of a man surrounded by electronic monsters and way ahead of not only his time but everybody else, he really can adjust to anything. And I never learned a thing about atonal music from him, only about tonal.
That's fascinating.
Now, if you know who Milton Babbitt is, and if you're a fan of 20th century music, as I am, you probably do know who he is. He's really the polar opposite of Hammerstein. Hammerstein's really interested in reaching the audience, and Babbitt is rather famous for writing an essay in which he distances himself from the need to please an audience. This very controversial and frankly misunderstood essay called "Who Cares If You Listen?" Now, if you already know who Babbitt is, you already know this. This is one of the standard texts that you read in a music history class about the 20th century. Babbitt is saying, essentially, that people who are writing in this very advanced 20th century idiom of serialism are writing for other experts in serialism, and they're writing at a kind of theoretical level that regular people shouldn't be expected to understand. They've got their own music, and this music is not meant for them. It is, in one way, the definition of elitism. But in another way, Babbitt is just saying, not everything is for everybody, right? I know I'm potentially testing your patience here. If you'll stick with me, I promise it'll be worthwhile. Long form is really the only way that you can profitably discuss this kind of music at any kind of depth. I would love to look at a piece of Milton Babbitt's music. This is a very famous selection that many people have analyzed because it's probably some of the easiest Babbitt to understand, at least what he's doing. But Babbitt's music is total serialism. Serialism was invented by Arnold Schoenberg, and his followers kept moving forward in the direction that Schoenberg set out. Please forgive me if you are an expert and I'm under-explaining things. But Schoenberg's idea was that you would take groups of notes at 12 pitches and then use those as a row, as a tone row, with no pitches repeating, and then you would manipulate that row somewhat mathematically so that you would sort of erase the idea of a tonic, erase the idea of a home pitch, and allow the notes a kind of freedom that tonality doesn't give you. That's a way of expressing it that's very positive to it. The followers of Schoenberg took that idea further, took it much further. And Babbitt would sort of play these mathematical games with the meter, with other elements of it. And then that's where we get the idea of total serialism. So this is a little tricky to get across, but in this piano part, in this piano piece, the left hand is playing, and that's a kind of weird little line, but it actually contains all 12 pitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The right hand is also playing all 12 pitches. Quite the rhythm. And they're actually, in fact, the same relationship of pitches. They're just starting on a different note and they're going different directions, but the relationships of those pitches are the same. That's math, right? But Babbitt has also extended that math into the rhythm of what's happening here. And he's got a rhythm pattern that has 5 and 4 and 1 and 2. In various permutations. So in the left hand, it has 5 notes, and then 1 note, and then 4 notes, and then 2 notes. And the last of each of those is a little longer to sort of set them apart from each other. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. The next line is the same numbers, but in a different order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, and so forth. So not only are these notes playing a mathematical game with each other, but the rhythms are also playing a kind of mathematical game too, using these various groupings to add up to 12 in different orders. Now, the people who don't like serialist music point out, you can't hear any of this. You can't in real time hear what's happening. That makes it really audience inaccessible. If you're looking at it, it's extremely interesting. If you're listening to it, not as much. Sondheim and a lot of the other composers who were born in the 1930s were dealing with a world where that kind of math music was what was being taught at universities all over the place. Now, Babbitt, as Sondheim mentioned, loved show tunes, and they talked about show tunes. And I don't really think that Babbitt really discussed all that much the serial things that he was working on with Sondheim. But Sondheim was inheriting a world where smart music was organized on mathematical principles. And like the other composers of his time, he was trying to find a way forward that preserved that intellectual rigor while still connecting to an audience. And these two facets of Sondheim's mentorship, from Hammerstein, who is trying really hard to embrace an audience, and Babbitt, who is really trying hard to be intellectually rigorous, created a set of values in Sondheim where those two things needed to coexist in order for him to feel like he had done a good job. The solution that many of these composers born in the 30s ultimately arrived at, we often call minimalism. And that makes audible the processes of process music, right? So if in 12-tone music, we're trying to apply a mathematical process to this composition of music, minimalists are trying in some way to make it so that you can hear what's happening. And the way that you make something audible often is by repeating it, right? So that your process is happening through the repeating of an idea. I think of Sondheim as a minimalist composer. Perhaps not in the same way as Steve Reich or Philip Glass, but a minimalist composer nonetheless, because his music operates on repetition and transformation, which takes us to On the Steps of the Palace. On the Steps of the Palace begins with a vamp that repeats itself 9 times before it changes. If that's not minimalism, I don't know what would be. The vamp itself consists of 3 interlocking patterns. The first pattern in the vamp is this. The second part of it is this. It's these 2 notes going back and forth. You might think of this as I wish, I wish, I wish, I wish. And the third part is also an I wish. I wish. You know, very much like that. I wish, right? I wish, I wish, I wish. And these 3 patterns are going back and all like, they're just looping around in a little minimalist loop, right? What does Sondheim mean by this pattern? Well, he said this of this passage. He wrote, On the Steps of the Palace really comes out of Very Nice Prince. That's what this 2-note accompaniment figure is from. So it's really for Cinderella and the baker's wife. He says, I wanted something liquid and running. It's 2 girls getting together and dishing a ball. I wanted something that sounded like a conversation flowing. That's really what this sort of vamp is about. Also, that bass blurs the harmony. You're never quite sure where you are. You don't know whether this is the tonic chord or a dominant chord. And the unsettled quality was what I was working for. So we're really in this key, right? But he could be like here. He hasn't given us enough information to know whether we're home or far away. And that's part of what he's trying to do. The next thing we want to notice, and this is really a key, not just to understanding Into the Woods, but understanding all of the ways that Sondheim's mature work operates, is this. The melodic ideas work out as slowly transforming cells. So the first thing that Cinderella sings is, he's a very smart prince. If you look at the first 3 phrases, they all begin with those 4 notes. The first one, he's a very smart prince. He's a prince who prepares, that's different, knowing this time I'd run from him. The first 3 of those phrases begin with those notes, but then they kind of go in a different direction. They're variations on that. And what we have now is really multiple versions of the same idea that are now a vocabulary of expression for Cinderella as she is working through her issue here, right? She's on the point of a decision. That's where most really good musical theater songs happen. Let's look at the lyric for a second, because that's also, of course, of primary importance. We want to think about Sondheim's lyrics in this part of his career in particular as setting up binaries, binary oppositions, and then either confirming the binary or subverting the binary. Here's what I mean. if we're thinking about like A and B, he's a very smart prince. He's a prince who prepares. Knowing this time I'd run from him, he spread pitch on the stairs. Do you feel that like 1, 2, 1, 2? But then this is where Sondheim gets really creative and delightful. This is something he does that very few other composer lyricists do well. He's a very smart prince, that's A. He's a prince who prepares, that's B. Knowing this time I'd run from him, that's A. He spread pitch on the stairs, I was caught unawares, and I thought, well, he cares. Because we have those 3 second half rhymes in a row, it feels like everything went off kilter and we got stuck in a little rut on the B end of the binary. At the moment he breaks that lyric binary pattern, he also alters the accompaniment pattern and the melodic pattern. So he was here, right? And as soon as he gets to that last part where it switches, he spread pitch on the stairs, I was caught unawares, and I thought, right, so everything changes right at that spot where the binary gets shifted. That's working psychologically on us. Our brains want to predict this binary, and Sondheim sets up the binary and then takes it away from us right at the point when Cinderella is making a rhetorical shift. So how are these changes happening? Well, first of all, the time signature is changing. It was in a kind of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now it's in 6. Da da dee da dum, da da dee da dum. We've lost a whole beat worth of material, which is kind of exciting. We've also changed the pattern from to, that's now higher and of course shorter because of the meter. And this pattern down here has now moved to up, right? And that creates this feeling when you take a beat out of the bar, it creates a kind of kinetic feeling as though things are intensifying and getting faster. 1, 2, 3 is where we were, and now we're going 1, 2, 1, 2, which feels like things are getting a lot more exciting. Sondheim is leading us through a structure that has none of the traditional markers that we normally think of in a show tune to help us understand where we are in the tune. So he's using this binary to help us find our way through this woods of a piece, right? But he's also using consonants as a poetic and dramatic tool. He's a prince who prepares, he spread pitch on the stairs, I was caught unawares, and I thought, well, he cares. Those are the balance, we're balanced into the second half. She's in a rut, she's melodically circling. This is more than just malice, and she says, better stop and take stock while you're standing here stuck on the steps of the palace. Stop, stock, standing, stuck. Why ST? Well, ST is literally the stickiest consonant pair. It makes us feel like our words are also getting stuck, which is exactly where Cinderella is at this moment. As soon as she gets to that spot, the melodic material stops developing and gets stuck in a circular rut. Better stop and take stock while you're standing here stuck on the steps of... There's a kind of ruminative loop that the character gets stuck in. And that's very typical in a Sondheim song. The character sets up a little binary as they're trying to make a decision, and at some point they lose the binary and get stuck in a little rut where they're really thinking through this very specific thing. They begin to get an obsessive loop, which eventually releases on Palace. Palace is the rhyme we've been waiting for, so it's very satisfying. We had this malice hanging in the air. Better stop and take stock while you're standing here stuck on the steps of the palace is where it starts to, where it gets back to something that we recognize. That kind of energy is a different kind of kinetic energy, right? So we had an energy where we had 1, 2, 3, which became 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. This is the opposite. This is like an energy that is building and building and building and then releasing. Better stop and take stock while you're standing here stuck on the steps of the palace, right? So we want to be thinking as performers about the energy of a phrase, right? The energy that is either picking up speed, right? Or perhaps releasing speed as it goes. What is the energy of the phrase? How does that match the dramatic intention? That's the main thing of this character. Because Sondheim's choices in this regard are always related to what the character is thinking at the time. Once we get to that release of Palace, a new accompaniment emerges. Now, that is a sort of, let me think about what I'm doing vibe, which happens to a bunch of characters in Into the Woods. And all of these characters' journeys are musically related to each other. So let's compare some of these vamps. So I've moved these all into the same key so that we can hear how they're related to each other. That's the new steps of the Palace vamp. But it also sounds very similar to, that's the I Know Things Now vamp. Here's the Giants in the Sky vamp. Very similar. And then the Moments in the Woods vamp. At one point, Sondheim in an interview said, I was thinking about calling all 4 songs I Know Things Now because the phrase occurs in some form in all the songs, and he had toyed with the idea of doing 4 versions of the same song with different lyrics. But at each of these points, the character is trying to process what's happening, which is really a key theme of Into the Woods, right? How do we process the traumatic things that are happening to us at any moment? And Sondheim gives not an identical, but a similar thing to each of these characters to show that their experience is related to each other. So I hope you can sort of see that Sondheim, on a micro level, the melody is tracing individual ways of ending that, right, as variations. And then in a larger way, the songs are also aiming us through variation at different depictions of the same existential experience, right? These mathematical permutations of this melody are being put in the service of a dramatic idea. Sondheim says, on the steps of the palace, I don't know if you ever know where you are until bar 23, where it says, oh, I see, we are in D major. That's that spot, right? We're in D major. Very nice Prince, he says, I don't think we ever know where we are. And an interviewer said, how do you compose a song where the harmony itself is so uncertain if you can't be sure you're in the dominant or the tonic? And Sondheim says, I think it's just up to the audience. Let them worry about it. There was a nice phrase in my counterpoint book in college. It was a very conservative little book on counterpoint. And the author disapproved of a certain technique and said, this is the refuge of the destitute. And I think this is the refuge of the destitute. It could be viewed that way. I don't think I felt that way, but actually, he says, it's easier not to make up your mind, isn't it? As Cinderella points out, it reflects her state of mind. So even to the point of the ambivalence of which chord am I playing, that's the whole point. So as you're listening to this song, and you might be like, I don't even know where I am, I don't even know what this song is, that's where Cinderella is psychologically, and that's why Sondheim does that in the first place. He wants you to be a little unsure where you are, just as Cinderella is. So Sondheim has set up this binary that he subverts, but the thing about human psychology is we're always looking for patterns. So as soon as we've got this pattern, right, and we've got an idea of, well, this is how this piece is going to go rhetorically, we've got that in our memory as a reference point for how it goes. And like any good composer, Sondheim is here to affirm and to deny that going forward. So she goes, you think, what do you want? You think, make a decision. Why not stay and be caught? You think, well, it's a thought. What would be his response? Well, what do you want? You think, make a decision. Well, that feels like a binary. Why not stay and be caught? You think, well, it's a thought. Now we're all kind of jammed on one side of the binary. What would be his response? Okay, maybe caught and thought are the A now, and response is the other bit. Then what if he knew who you were when you know that you're not what he thinks that he wants? Well, now that we know the vocabulary of this piece, and it's part of Sondheim's general vocabulary, what if he knew who you were when you, well, now we're in a little obsessive loop again. What's the consonant here? What if he knew who you were when you know that you're not what he thinks that he wants? All these W's. W is the consonant that is least specific. Whoa, whoa, whoa. There's a reason why who, what, where, when, how, all of those the 5 W's are questions, because the W consonant is so woodgy. And then what if you are what a prince would envision? That envision is rhyming with decision way up top. He left, you think, make a decision hanging. And then you got all of this dialogue. What a prince would envision. Finally, he pays off that rhyme that was way earlier. Woo. And then what if you are what a prince would envision? Still in the W world. Although how can you know who you are till you know what you want, which you don't? So then which do you pick? Again, melodically in a recursive loop, and lyric-wise stuck in a W pattern, where you're safe out of sight and yourself, but where everything's wrong, or where everything's right and you know that you'll never belong. And whichever you pick, do it quick because you're starting to stick to and we get back to the sticky stuff. Now when he gets to this section, Sondheim establishes, now here's another just spectacular composer device that nobody does better than Sondheim. Nobody talks about it either. So we have this, we've been in D major, and then we have this, what if you knew who you were when you know that you're not? B flat. This is a chromatic mediant situation. They are very foreign to each other. Why? Because Cinderella is in two worlds. She's in the world with her step family, and she's in this world where the festival is. So she goes, what if you knew who you were when you know that you're not what he thinks that he wants, back to this other world, right? So the crazy thing is, so you have D major and B flat. So foreign key area, safe out of sight in yourself, but where everything's wrong, or where everything's right and you know that you'll never belong. We're vacillating between the two key areas, just as she's vacillating between the two spaces of her world. Whichever you pick, do it quick, because you're starting to stick to the steps of the palace. We're back in D, which is the home key of this song and this confusion that she's living in. There are also a number of really interesting chromatic inflections and key areas that help us tell the story. So the first 26 measures are entirely in D major. The first accidentals, C natural and F natural, happen on the word decision. And at what if he knew, it goes between D major and F major. At whichever you pick, do it quick, we are briefly in B melodic minor, which only shares two notes with D major. So Sondheim is not just using this like tonal binary, but the melody itself and the keys that the melody is inflecting are also helping us establish these beachheads tonally into these various different worlds that Cinderella is trying to navigate between. There's a new accompaniment idea that matches this new dramatic idea. This idea is, of course, from the beginning, right? This. Now it's in a much brighter key. It's your first big decision. The choice isn't easy to make. This new passage is very tonally unstable in terms of key. So Sondheim gives us the most regular meter in the text. He stops playing funny business with the text so that we can have a place to understand where we are amid all of this tonal instability. A lot of really important songs in Into the Woods share this middle section is really tonally unstable, and this is one of them. It's your first big decision. The choice isn't easy to make. To arrive at a ball is exciting and all. Once you're there, though, it's scary. And it's fun to deceive when you know you could leave, but you have to be wary. This is a very classic internal rhyme situation that you might hear in a Rodgers and Hart song, an old-fashioned 20s song. There's a lot that's at stake, but you've stalled long enough because you're still standing stuck in the stuff on the steps. Well, now we're back to this ST business. He's established that. These are the notes that Sondheim uses in this passage. He uses, in fact, all of the notes, all 12 of them, and he uses most of them in a passage derived from one of the individual cells. Remember this passage? Well, you've got this, this. The left hand is doing this little chromatic descending, falling down the stairs passage, and that has a kind of motion of the ground sort of slipping out from under you tonally. Whatever you thought you knew is completely disintegrating tonally as this bass part, the bass which is supposed to ground us in a key, is now completely lost all of its tonal coherence and is slipping down the drain. In the vocal line at that moment, Sondheim is emphasizing some words using very dissonant intervals like scary, that's a tritone, and wary. Those are two. Tritones are the most dissonant possible interval in this kind of music, and Sondheim is using them on the words scary and wary, which makes a lot of sense dramatically. Everything's always intentional. One of the ways a composer can keep things understandable is using sequencing and parallel construction. So in this case, he goes, to arrive at a ball is exciting and all once you're there, though it's scary. Then he sequences it, doing exactly the same thing on a lower pitch level. We recognize that as two versions of the same idea that helps us to ground ourselves and understand where we are in the song. Now, when we get to the very end of the tune here, we get a payoff. And the payoff really combines a lot of these techniques in this beautiful way. It's so interesting. Then from out of the blue, and without any guide, feel your brain making sense of the binary as you listen. Then from out of the blue, and without any guide, you know what your decision is, which is not to decide. You'll just leave him a clue, for example, a shoe, and then see what he'll do. If it's he and not you who is stuck with a shoe in the goo, you've learned something too, something you never knew on the steps of the palace. Okay, well, all those ooh vowels, if you've ever sung this song, you know counting this is a pain in the neck, right? Because Sondheim is stretching the rhythm forward and back, not letting us feel the regularity enough to predict what might happen next. But those ooh vowels are taking us toward, those ooh rhymes are taking us toward the end of the number we know. You'll just leave him a clue, beat, beat, for example, a shoe, beat, beat, and then see what he'll do, beat, beat, now it's he and not you who's stuck with a shoe, beat in a stew, beat, beat. Right? So if you've sung this, you know that's a big pain in the neck. The rhyme is telling us that we're coming to the end. The rhythm is telling us that this is not quite settled yet. While that instability is happening, Sondheim gives us a traditional indication that the piece is coming to a close. First, the original idea simplified and in a higher range. Then the same thing down lower, indicating that we're grounding this, we're coming down to earth, and then a dominant pedal. When you hear this kind of thing, you know you're eventually going to go there, right? That's a really old composer trick to get us like we feel like we're coming back. Then our first idea comes back with this bass on the dominant. And you've learned something too, something you never knew, right? She's knows things now. She's bringing the train into the station. You get this one more time through this vamp that connects us to the baker's wife, Jack in Little Red, then a flourish, and then a tonic chord. So I hope you can see that there's actually quite a lot of little bitty pieces of musical material that are being manipulated in a very particular way so that we in the audience are kind of forced to guess what might happen next. And then he sometimes gives us what we want and sometimes not, as he leads us through this decision process where Cinderella actually makes a decision. And this is something that we sometimes miss in modern musical theater. When a character goes out and then just sings about how sad they are and never makes a decision. Sondheim's characters are often very dramatically interesting, right? They're in a moment where they're trying to decide between two things and they have to pick. And by the end of the song, they've picked. There's an action that they're going to play. Very good stuff for a performer. We could talk about this all day. Sondheim goes on and on forever. But I hope you can see just in this little brief visit to this one really important moment in Into the Woods, how Sondheim's mentors, Hammerstein and Babbitt, introduced him to an aesthetic world where it was really important to do something rigorous, to manipulate his ideas in a very careful way, but also to do it always in the service of the story and in the service of watching interesting characters go through difficult times and make interesting decisions. And his novel and fascinating methodologies that he developed in a very personal way are a direct result of those mentors and unique, maybe in the history of lyric theater, but especially in the history of the American musical. I'm going to make another video before I post my blog post about Into the Woods to talk about The Last Midnight, which is another fascinating deep dive into Sondheim. But I hope that was interesting to you. I hope you got something out of it. If you're preparing this as a singer or a pianist, good luck. May the odds be ever in your favor.